Trust isn't something you give away. It's something that gets stolen from you, one small lie at a time. By the time you realize what's happening, you're already sitting in a concrete cell, wondering how a simple business deal turned into the worst mistake of your life. The guards don't care about your story. The lawyers want money you don't have. And the woman who put you there, she's probably counting the cash while you're counting the days until trial. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who falls for a scam. I ran a backpacker hostel in Bangkok for 3 years, dealt with every type of traveler you can imagine, and I thought I knew how things worked in Thailand. I was wrong about everything, especially about her. The first time I saw Koulap, she was dancing at a club in Nana Plaza. But she wasn't like the other girls there. She didn't rush over with the usual sales pitch. Instead, she watched me for about an hour, nursing the same drink, before she finally walked over to my table. "You look like a businessman," she said in perfect English, sitting down without asking. "Most foreigners here, they come for fun. You come for something else." I was impressed. She was right. I wasn't there to party. I was there because my hostel was bleeding money, and I was desperate for some kind of distraction from watching my life savings disappear. "What makes you think that?" I asked. "The way you watch people. The way you count your change. The way you check your phone every 5 minutes like you're waiting for important news." She smiled, but it wasn't the fake smile I was used to from the other girls. "My name is Koulap. I'm from Iloilo City in the Philippines." "Eugene," I said. "I own a hostel near Khao San Road." "Struggling?" she asked, and when I nodded, she leaned forward. "I might be able to help you. I know about business, real business, not the kind of business most girls here know about." We talked for 2 hours. She told me about electronics importing, about the profit margins between China and the Philippines, about the connections she had in both countries. She spoke with confidence and knowledge that surprised me. She knew shipping costs, customs procedures, profit calculations. When she mentioned she'd made over $30,000 in the past year through her import business, I started paying real attention. "Why are you dancing here if you're making that kind of money?" I asked. "Because I need a foreign partner for the next level, someone with legitimacy, with a business address, with credibility that I can't get as a young Filipino woman." She looked directly into my eyes. "I've been looking for the right person. Someone smart but not greedy. Someone who needs money but isn't desperate enough to do something stupid." I should have been offended by that last comment, but instead, I was intrigued. Here was a young woman who seemed to understand exactly what I needed to hear. My hostel was failing. I had maybe 6 months of operating funds left, and I was facing the possibility of returning to Colorado with nothing to show for my Thailand adventure except debt and embarrassment. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "A partnership. You provide the foreign business credentials and some capital. I provide the connections and the expertise. We split everything 50-50. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of electronics shipments, customs forms, profit sheets. "This isn't some bar girl fantasy, Eugene. This is real business." By the time I left that club at 3 a.m., I had her phone number and a head full of possibilities. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about something. Koulap wasn't just offering me a business opportunity. She was offering me a chance to save everything I'd worked for in Thailand. I walked back to my hostel thinking maybe I'd finally met someone who could change my life. I was right about that part. Just not in the way I expected. The next morning, Koulap showed up at my hostel with a folder full of documents. She was dressed professionally, looked completely different from the night before. She sat in my small office and spread out papers across my desk like she owned the place. I was impressed by her transformation and by the detail of her business plan. "The key is electronics," she explained, pointing to a spreadsheet on her laptop. "Phones, tablets, accessories. We buy in bulk from factories in Shenzhen, ship to Bangkok for customs processing, then forward to Manila. The markup is incredible because Philippine import taxes are structured differently than Thailand's. She showed me invoices from previous shipments, profit calculations, even photos of her warehouse contact in Manila. Everything looked professional and legitimate. The numbers were impressive but not unrealistic. According to her calculations, a $10,000 investment could return $3,000 to $4,000 profit within 6 weeks. Why me? I asked. You could find investors anywhere. Because you have something most people don't, she said. You have a legitimate business address in Thailand. You speak English perfectly, and you're not greedy enough to ask stupid questions or demand unrealistic returns. Plus, you need this to work. Desperate people make bad partners, but motivated people make great ones. I studied the documents for an hour. Everything seemed to check out. The shipping routes made sense. The profit margins were good but not too good, and she had photos and contact information for every step of the process. She even showed me her previous tax returns from the Philippines, proving she'd been doing this successfully for over a year. I'll need to think about it, I said. Of course, but don't think too long. I have 2 other potential partners, and one of them is very interested. She packed up her papers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this presentation many times. Call me when you decide. But Eugene, I hope you realize what kind of opportunity this is. Most foreigners in Thailand are here to waste money. You could be here to make it. After she left, I spent the rest of the day running numbers. My hostel was losing about $1,500 a month. I had maybe $20,000 left in my savings. If I could make even $3,000 profit every 6 weeks, I could keep the hostel running while building a second income stream. It seemed like the only realistic way to save my business and my life in Thailand. That evening I called her. I'm interested, but I want to start small. Test the waters. Smart, she said. How small? $3,000. Perfect. That'll get us 1 good shipment. If everything goes well, we can scale up from there. Her voice sounded genuinely excited. Not the fake enthusiasm I was used to from people trying to separate me from my money. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I'll introduce you to my Bangkok contact, and we can get the process started. I agreed, and spent that night feeling more optimistic than I had in months. Finally, I'd found someone who understood business and seemed to have a real plan for making money in Thailand. I should have been suspicious of how perfectly everything was falling into place, but desperation has a way of making you believe what you need to believe. I was so focused on the possibility of success that I missed all the warning signs of what was really happening. The next morning changed everything. Koulap arrived exactly on time with her Bangkok contact, a middle-aged Thai man named Somchai, who spoke excellent English and seemed to know exactly what he was doing. We met at a coffee shop near the port, and he showed me the warehouse where the shipments were processed and the customs office where the paperwork was handled. Eugene, I've been working with Koulap for 8 months, Somchai explained. She's very professional, very reliable. This business model works because we handle all the complicated parts. You just provide the investment and the foreign business credentials. Everything seemed legitimate. The warehouse was real, the customs officials were professional, and all the paperwork looked official. Somchai even showed me his business license and tax registration. I signed the investment agreement and transferred $3,000 to the business account Koulap had set up. 2 weeks, Koulap promised. The shipment will arrive in Manila. My contact there will sell everything, and you'll see your profit. For 2 weeks, I received regular updates. Photos of the electronics being packed in Shenzhen, customs forms from Bangkok, shipping confirmations from the freight company. Everything was documented and professional. Koulap called me every few days with progress reports, and her excitement seemed genuine. Then the money came through. $4,200. Exactly as promised. I couldn't believe it had actually worked. My first successful business deal in Thailand, and it was with a 2-year-old dancer from the Philippines who turned out to be smarter than most of the businessmen I knew back in Colorado. Congratulations, Koulap said when she delivered my profit in cash. You just made 40% return in 2 weeks. How does that feel? Incredible, I admitted. I wasn't sure it would really work. Most people aren't. That's why most people stay poor. She counted out my profit and handed it to me, with a smile that seemed genuinely proud. So, ready to scale up? I was more than ready. The success of the first shipment had erased all my doubts and most of my caution. Here was proof that I could make real money in Thailand, that I could save my hostel and build something bigger. For the first time since arriving in Thailand, I felt like I knew what I was doing. "How much bigger can we go?" I asked. "With your credibility established, we can do much larger shipments. The profit margins get better with volume." She pulled out her calculator and started running number. $15,000 could return $5,000 or $6,000 profit, maybe more if we hit the right market timing. 15,000 was almost everything I had left, but the math was compelling. If I could make $5,000 profit every month, I could not only save my hostel but actually start building wealth. I could stop worrying about money and start thinking about expansion, maybe opening a second hostel or investing in other opportunities. "I need a few days to think about it," I said, but we both knew I was going to say yes. "Take your time, but don't take too long. The market conditions are perfect right now, and that won't last forever." She squeezed my hand before leaving. "Eugene, you're about to change your whole life. I hope you realize that." I did realize it. I just didn't realize how. 3 days later, I called Koulap and committed to the $15,000 shipment. This time, the process was more involved. There were more documents to sign, more meetings with Somchai, more details to coordinate, but everything still seemed professional and legitimate. If anything, the increased complexity made me more confident that this was a real business operation. "This shipment is big enough that you'll need to be present for the customs processing," Koulap explained. "It's standard procedure for investments over $10,000. Foreign investors have to personally authorize the shipment." That made sense to me. I'd been to the customs office with the first shipment, met the officials, seen how the process worked. Being present for the larger shipment seemed like a reasonable requirement. "When do I need to be there?" I asked. "Next Tuesday morning. Somchai will pick you up at your hostel and take you to the port. It's mostly just signing papers and authorizing the release, but you have to be there in person." I marked it on my calendar and spent the weekend imagining what I'd do with the profit from this shipment. Maybe I'd finally be able to renovate the hostel's bathrooms, or add air conditioning to more rooms, or even start looking for a second property. The possibilities seemed endless. Tuesday morning arrived with Somchai knocking on my door at exactly 8 a.m. He drove me to the port in his clean, professional-looking sedan, talking about the market conditions and the profit potential of the shipment. Everything seemed normal and businesslike. The customs office was busy but organized. Officials moved efficiently through their paperwork, processing shipments from various importers. When our turn came, a uniformed officer explained the documents I needed to sign and the procedures I needed to follow. Everything was in Thai, but Koulap translated each form carefully and explained what I was authorizing. "This form authorizes the shipment contents," she explained, pointing to a document. "This one confirms you as the foreign investor. This one releases the shipment for export to the Philippines." I signed everything, trusting her translations and feeling confident that I was finally doing something right with my life in Thailand. The officials stamped the documents, gave me copies, and told me the shipment would be released within 24 hours. Somchai drove me back to my hostel, and I spent the rest of the day feeling proud of myself for taking control of my financial situation. For 3 days, everything seemed normal. Koulap sent me updates. Somchai confirmed the shipment had left Bangkok, and I received tracking information showing the cargo was en route to Manila. I started planning how I'd invest the profit from this shipment, maybe scaling up to $25,000 for the next one. Then my world ended. I woke up Thursday morning to the sound of heavy pounding on my hostel's front door. Before I could even get dressed, the door burst open and 6 Thai police officers rushed into my lobby. 2 more officers were stationed outside, and all of them were armed and serious. "Eugene Patterson?" the lead officer asked in accented English. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" You are under arrest for drug trafficking and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. He showed me a warrant with my name and address clearly printed in both Thai and English. You have the right to contact the American embassy. I couldn't process what was happening. There must be some mistake. I don't have anything to do with drugs. I run a hostel. You signed customs documents authorizing a shipment containing methamphetamines. Another officer explained, pulling out photocopies of the forms I'd signed on Tuesday. 47 kilograms of crystal methamphetamine hidden in electronic shipment to Manila. The room started spinning. I grabbed the edge of my reception desk to keep from falling over. No, that's impossible. Those were electronics. I saw the invoices, the shipment details. There were no drugs. The shipment was intercepted in international waters. Hidden compartments in the electronics contained methamphetamines with street value of approximately $2 million. The lead officer looked at me with the expression of someone who'd heard every excuse. Your signature is on all authorization documents. They handcuffed me in my own lobby while the other guests watched in shock and confusion. As they led me to the police van, I kept repeating that there had to be a mistake, that I didn't know anything about drugs, that I was just investing in electronics. But even as I said it, I was starting to understand what had really happened. Koulap had played me perfectly. The successful first shipment, the professional presentation, the legitimate-looking warehouse and customs office, it had all been designed to get me to sign those documents. I wasn't a business partner. I was a patsy, a foreign face to put on a drug trafficking operation. While I thought I was investing in electronics, I was actually providing the credibility and authorization that the real criminals needed to move their drugs. In the police van, handcuffed and heading to jail, I finally understood why Koulap had chosen me so carefully. She hadn't been looking for a business partner. She'd been looking for a fall guy. The first few hours in Thai jail were pure panic. I couldn't think straight, couldn't process what was happening, couldn't understand how my life had changed so completely in just a few hours. They put me in a holding cell with about 20 other men, most of whom didn't speak English. The smell was overwhelming, the noise was constant, and the reality of my situation was just starting to sink in. I kept asking to call Koulap, to contact the American embassy, to speak to someone who could explain what was happening. But the guards didn't speak much English, and the few inmates who could translate weren't particularly helpful. Drugs? One English-speaking prisoner asked when I tried to explain my situation. You're fucked, man. Thai drug laws don't mess around. By the second day, I managed to get access to a phone and called Koulap's number. It was disconnected. I tried calling Somchai. His number was also disconnected. The business phone number Koulap had given me was answered by someone who claimed not to know anyone by that name. Every contact, every phone number, every connection I had to the business had simply vanished. That's when I started talking to other foreign inmates and learning how common this scam actually was. There was a German guy who'd been tricked into signing documents for a fake construction project that was actually money laundering. An Australian who thought he was investing in a legitimate bar that turned out to be a front for human trafficking. A British man who'd been convinced to put his name on property documents that were actually being used for illegal gambling operations. They target foreign business owners, the German explained, especially ones who are struggling financially. They build trust with small, legitimate deals, then use that trust to get you to sign documents for the big score. You think you're investing, but you're actually providing the foreign credibility that makes their operation look legitimate to customs and law enforcement. But I saw the warehouse, met with customs officials, had everything translated. I protested. All fake, the Australian said, or bribed. These operations are sophisticated. They can fake customs offices, bribe officials, create entire fake businesses just to convince you to sign the right documents. Once you sign, they don't need you anymore. They disappear, and you're left holding the legal responsibility for everything. The British guy nodded grimly. The girl who got me was also young and smart, also knew exactly what to say to make me feel like I was finally getting a real opportunity. They study their marks, figure out exactly what you need to hear, then feed it to you until you trust them completely. I realized I wasn't a victim of bad luck or poor judgment. I was a victim of a sophisticated criminal organization that had studied me, identified my vulnerabilities, and executed a plan to use me as a front for their drug trafficking operation. Every conversation with Koulap, every meeting with Somchai, every document I'd signed had been carefully orchestrated to get me to this exact point. The worst part was understanding how perfectly they'd read me. They knew I was desperate to save my hostel, knew I was attracted to intelligent women, knew I needed to feel like someone saw me as successful and capable. Koulap had been every bit as smart as she'd seemed, just not in the way I'd thought. She was smart enough to identify exactly what I needed to believe, and then make me believe it. 3 weeks into my stay in Thai jail, I finally managed to contact a lawyer through the American embassy. The news wasn't good. The evidence against me was overwhelming, and Thai drug trafficking laws are notoriously harsh. Even if I could prove I didn't know about the drugs, I'd still signed the documents that authorized the shipment. In Thai law, that made me criminally responsible regardless of my knowledge or intent. Your best hope is to negotiate a plea deal, my lawyer explained through the jail's phone system. Admit to negligent involvement in exchange for a reduced sentence and possible deportation instead of decades in prison. But even that will require substantial legal fees and could take months to arrange. How much? I asked, though I already knew I couldn't afford whatever the answer was going to be. At least $25,000 for the legal fees, plus costs for translators, court filings, and negotiations with prosecutors. And that's just to get you a plea deal. If you want to fight the charges, it could cost $100,000 or more with no guarantee of success. I laughed bitterly. I'd been arrested for trafficking drugs worth $2 million, but I couldn't afford the legal fees to defend myself because the same scam that put me in jail had also taken all my money. The irony was almost perfect. What happens if I can't pay for legal representation? You'll get a court-appointed public defender who probably won't speak much English and will be handling dozens of other cases. Thai public defenders are overworked and underpaid. Most of them will just advise you to plead guilty and hope for the best. I hung up the phone understanding that my situation was even worse than I'd realized. Not only was I facing decades in prison for crimes I didn't knowingly commit, but I also couldn't afford the legal help I needed to prove my innocence or even negotiate a reasonable plea deal. That night, lying on the concrete floor of my cell, I finally understood the full scope of what Koulap had done to me. She hadn't just stolen my money or used me as a front for drug trafficking. She'd engineered the complete destruction of my life in a way that left me with no resources to fight back. I was broke, facing serious criminal charges in a foreign legal system, unable to afford competent legal representation, and completely cut off from everyone who might have been able to help me. It was the perfect crime, and I'd walked into it willingly because I'd been so desperate to believe that someone finally saw potential in me. Life in Thai prison settled into a routine of fear, boredom, and regret. The days blended together in a haze of bad food, constant noise, and the overwhelming stench of too many men in too small a space. I learned to keep my head down, stay out of conflicts, and accept that this was my reality for the foreseeable future. The other foreign inmates became my lifeline. We formed an unofficial support group, sharing information about the legal system, pooling resources for phone calls, and warning each other about the various dangers of prison life. Most of us were there for similar reasons. We'd been used as fronts for criminal operations by people we'd trusted. The worst part isn't being in here, the German told me one day during exercise period. The worst part is knowing how stupid you were to trust them. I keep replaying every conversation, every warning sign I ignored, every moment I chose to believe what I wanted to believe instead of what was actually happening. I knew exactly what he meant. I spent hours analyzing every interaction I'd had with Koulap, looking for the clues I'd missed, the moments when I should have known something was wrong. The delayed communications, the changed meeting locations, the way she'd always had explanations for everything that seemed slightly off. I'd noticed all of it, but I'd chosen to ignore it because I'd needed the business opportunity to be real. "How long have you been here?" I asked him. 14 months, My family back home is trying to raise money for an appeal, but Thai legal appeals are expensive and slow. Most likely, I'll be here for another 3 to 5 years before I get deported. 3 to 5 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd been thinking in terms of months, maybe a year at most. The idea of spending the next 5 years in this place was almost incomprehensible. Meanwhile, my hostel business was falling apart without me there to run it. The few savings I had left were being drained by basic legal fees and the small bribes necessary to get phone access and decent food. My family back in Colorado knew I'd been arrested but didn't understand the full situation. My sister was trying to help, but she had her own family and financial responsibilities. She couldn't afford to send the kind of money I needed for proper legal representation. Every few weeks, I'd get updates about what was happening with my case. The prosecutors weren't interested in plea deals that didn't include substantial prison time. The evidence against me was too strong, and they needed to make examples of foreign criminals to deter others. My court-appointed lawyer was exactly as ineffective as the American embassy had warned: overworked, underpaid, and more interested in processing cases quickly than in mounting serious defenses. "Just plead guilty and accept the sentence," he advised during one of our brief meetings. "Fighting will only make it worse and cost money you don't have. The judges don't like foreigners who claim innocence when the evidence is so clear." "But I am innocent," I protested. "I didn't know there were drugs in that shipment." "Innocent or not, you signed the papers. In Thai law, that makes you responsible. Fighting this will only lead to a longer sentence and higher costs." I was trapped in a legal system I didn't understand, with no resources to mount a proper defense, facing prosecutors who saw me as a foreign criminal who needed to be made an example of. The justice system wasn't designed to determine my actual guilt or innocence. It was designed to process cases efficiently and demonstrate that Thailand was tough on foreign criminals. 6 months into my imprisonment, I learned through other inmates that there had been other foreigners arrested in similar schemes over the past 2 years. Always men, always business owners, always the same pattern of a young, intelligent local woman who'd gained their trust through small, successful business deals before using them as fronts for major criminal operations. "Your girl, Koulap," one of the inmates told me. "I heard about her from my cellmate. She did the same thing to a British guy about 8 months ago. Same business model. Same warehouse, same customs setup. He's in prison in Malaysia now, caught with a different drug shipment. The news was devastating but not surprising. I hadn't been special to Koulap. I hadn't been chosen because she saw potential in me or believed in our partnership. I'd been chosen because I fit a profile: desperate foreign business owner, with just enough money to be useful and just enough need to be manipulated." "How many of us are there?" I asked. "Nobody knows for sure. But these operations are big business. There are probably dozens of foreigners in prisons across Southeast Asia, all convicted of crimes they didn't know they were committing, all used by the same criminal organizations." I realized I was just one casualty in a much larger criminal enterprise. Somewhere, Koulap was probably working on her next victim, using the same techniques that had worked so perfectly on me. The warehouse, the fake customs office, the business presentations, it was all a repeatable process for turning desperate foreigners into drug mules. That night, I wrote a letter to my sister, explaining the full situation for the first time. I'd been protecting her from the worst details, hoping I could find a way to resolve everything before she learned how bad things really were. But it was time for her to understand that I wasn't coming home anytime soon, and that the brother she'd known was effectively gone. After 8 months in Thai jail, my lawyer finally negotiated a plea deal. I would admit to negligent involvement in drug trafficking, accept a sentence of 3 years, and be eligible for deportation after serving 18 months. It wasn't the outcome I'd hoped for, but it was better than the 15 to 20 years I'd been facing if convicted at trial. The hardest part was signing the plea agreement. Even though I knew it was my only realistic option, admitting guilt for crimes I didn't knowingly commit felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about justice and truth. But the Thai legal system wasn't interested in my beliefs. It was interested in processing my case efficiently and demonstrating that foreign criminals would be punished. "You're making the right choice," my lawyer assured me as I signed the documents. "This gives you a future. Fighting would have given you nothing but more years in prison and financial ruin for your family." I knew he was right, but that didn't make it feel any less wrong. By signing that plea agreement, I was officially accepting responsibility for Koulap's crimes. I was admitting that I had knowingly participated in drug trafficking, even though the truth was that I'd been manipulated and used by people who were much smarter and more experienced than me. The plea hearing was brief and procedural. The judge accepted my guilty plea, imposed the agreed-upon sentence, and ordered that I be held in prison until my deportation could be arranged. The whole process took less than 30 minutes. 18 years of my life, and my entire future, were decided in a courthouse proceeding that lasted less than a typical sitcom episode. After the hearing, I was returned to my cell to wait for deportation. The other inmates congratulated me on getting such a favorable deal, but I felt empty rather than relieved. I'd avoided the worst-case scenario, but I was still facing more than a year in Thai prison, followed by deportation back to a country where I'd have nothing: no money, no business, no home, no reputation. "At least you're going home eventually," the German told me. "That's more than some of us can say." He was right. But going home felt less like salvation and more like another kind of prison. I'd left Colorado as a man pursuing his dreams in Thailand. I'd be returning as a convicted drug trafficker with no resources and no prospects. Everyone I'd known back home would have heard about my arrest and conviction. The small town where I'd grown up would remember me as the guy who went to Thailand and became a criminal. During my final months in Thai jail, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I'd lost and what I'd learned. I'd lost my business, my savings, my freedom, and my reputation. But I'd learned something important about how sophisticated criminal organizations target and exploit vulnerable people. I'd learned that desperation makes you vulnerable to manipulation, and that people who seem to offer exactly what you need are often the most dangerous people you can meet. Most importantly, I'd learned that the woman I'd thought was my business partner and potential romantic connection had never existed. The real Koulap was a criminal who'd studied me carefully, identified my vulnerabilities, and executed a plan to use me as a front for drug trafficking. Everything I'd found attractive about her, her intelligence, her business knowledge, her confidence, had been real, but it had all been directed toward destroying my life for her profit. I would never know her real name, her real background, or her real motivations. I would never know if anything she'd told me about herself had been true. But I would always remember how perfectly she'd manipulated me, and how willingly I'd participated in my own destruction because I'd been so desperate to believe that someone finally saw potential in me. 14 months after my arrest, I was released from Thai prison and immediately deported to the United States. The deportation process was efficient and humiliating. I was escorted to the airport in handcuffs, processed through immigration as an undesirable foreign criminal, and put on a flight to Denver with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a plastic bag containing the few personal items that had survived my imprisonment. The flight home was the longest 12 hours of my life. I kept thinking about how excited I'd been when I'd first flown to Thailand 5 years earlier, full of dreams about starting a new life and building something meaningful in Southeast Asia. Now I was returning as a broke, convicted criminal with no prospects and no future. My sister Linda was waiting for me at Denver International Airport. I barely recognized her. She'd aged years in the 14 months since I'd seen her, and the stress of dealing with my situation had clearly taken its toll. But she hugged me like I was returning from war, which in a way, I was. "I'm sorry," I said, and started crying for the first time since my arrest. "We'll figure it out," she said, though I could hear in her voice that she had no idea how we were going to figure anything out. Linda drove me to her house in Lakewood, where I'd be staying indefinitely. Her husband Mark was polite, but obviously uncomfortable with having a convicted drug trafficker living in his home. Their teenage son avoided me completely, probably embarrassed to have his friends know that his uncle was a criminal. The first few weeks were the hardest. I had no money, no identification except for my passport, no credit, and no prospects. I was a 4-year-old convicted felon with no recent work history in the United States, and no explanation for the gap in my resume that didn't involve admitting to drug trafficking charges in Thailand. Linda helped me apply for basic social services and started making phone calls to find me some kind of work. But employers weren't interested in hiring someone with my background, especially for positions that required any kind of trust or responsibility. After dozens of rejections, I finally found work at a warehouse loading trucks for $12 an hour, 40 hours a week if I was lucky. The job was hard physical labor, but it was honest work, and it kept me busy enough that I didn't spend all day thinking about what I'd lost. My co-workers were mostly young guys who didn't ask questions about my background, which suited me fine. I wasn't ready to explain my story to anyone, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Evenings were the worst. I'd sit in Linda's basement bedroom, looking at job listings online or watching television, trying not to think about how completely my life had been destroyed by one decision to trust the wrong person. I'd had a successful business, savings, property, a future. Now I was a middle-aged man living in his sister's basement, working a minimum wage job, and trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been completely destroyed by my own poor judgment. The hardest part was accepting that I'd been complicit in my own destruction. Yes, Koulap had manipulated me, but I'd also ignored warning signs because I'd wanted to believe her. I'd been so desperate for success and so attracted to her intelligence that I'd chosen to trust her even when part of me suspected something wasn't right. I couldn't blame everything on her criminal organization. I had to accept responsibility for my part in what had happened. After 6 months of working at the warehouse and living in Linda's basement, I started to accept that this was my new reality. I wasn't going back to Thailand. I wasn't going to rebuild my hostel business. I wasn't going to have the adventurous, entrepreneurial life I'd dreamed of when I'd first moved to Southeast Asia. I was going to be a convicted felon working manual labor jobs and trying to stay out of trouble until I died. But accepting that reality also brought a kind of peace. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started focusing on the small things I could control. I paid Linda rent when I could. I tried to be helpful around the house. I worked hard at my job and earned the respect of my supervisor. I started going to the gym and reading books again. Small steps, but steps forward. I also started thinking about what I'd learned from my experience and whether there was any way to use that knowledge to help other people avoid the same mistakes. I began researching the criminal organizations that target foreigners in Southeast Asia, reading about other victims, and understanding the scope of these operations. What I learned was disturbing but not surprising. There are sophisticated criminal networks throughout Southeast Asia that specifically target vulnerable foreigners, usually middle-aged men who are struggling financially or emotionally. These networks use young, intelligent, attractive women to build relationships with their targets, gain their trust through small, successful transactions, then use that trust to involve them in major criminal operations. The women aren't just random criminals. They're carefully selected and trained to identify and exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities. They study their targets, learn their needs and desires, and present themselves as the solution to their problems. The business opportunities they offer are designed to be believable, but not too good to be true. The romantic connections they develop are real enough to create genuine emotional investment, but calculated enough to serve the larger criminal purpose. I realized that Koulap had probably spent weeks studying me before she'd approached me at that club. She'd known about my failing hostel, my financial situation, my loneliness, and my desperate need to feel successful. She'd crafted her entire persona around what she knew I wanted to see in a woman and a business partner. Every conversation, every gesture, every moment of apparent intimacy had been designed to move me closer to signing those customs documents. The sophistication of these operations is what makes them so effective and so difficult to prosecute. The criminals aren't obvious scammers asking for wire transfers to Nigerian princes. They're intelligent, professional, patient criminals who invest months in building relationships with their targets. They create elaborate fake businesses, bribe officials, and maintain multiple identities across different countries. They're essentially running international criminal enterprises that rival legitimate corporations in their complexity and organization. Most victims never report these crimes because they're too embarrassed to admit they were fooled, or because they're facing criminal charges themselves for unknowingly participating in the schemes. Law enforcement agencies in different countries don't communicate effectively about these cases, so the same criminal organizations can operate across multiple jurisdictions without being detected or stopped. After a year of working at the warehouse, I decided to start writing about my experience. Not because I thought it would make me money or restore my reputation, but because I hoped it might help other people recognize the warning signs before it was too late. I started a blog documenting what had happened to me and what I'd learned about these criminal operations. The response surprised me. I heard from dozens of other men who'd had similar experiences across Southeast Asia. Some had lost money but avoided criminal charges. Others were facing legal troubles in various countries. A few had managed to escape their situations before being fully exploited, but they all described the same pattern of manipulation and exploitation. I thought I was the only one stupid enough to fall for something like this. One man wrote to me, "Reading your story helped me understand that this wasn't about my stupidity. This was about their sophistication." Another man shared his story of being used as a front for a human trafficking operation in the Philippines. Like me, he'd thought he was investing in a legitimate business and had signed documents he didn't fully understand. Unlike me, he'd managed to escape the country before being arrested, but he'd lost his life savings and couldn't return to the Philippines without facing criminal charges. These stories helped me understand that my experience, while devastating, wasn't unique. There are probably hundreds or thousands of men across the world who've been exploited by these criminal organizations. Most of them suffer in silence, too ashamed to share their stories or seek help. Writing about my experience also helped me process what had happened and move towards some kind of emotional resolution. I couldn't get my old life back, but I could try to prevent other people from making the same mistakes I'd made. If even one person read my story and decided not to trust that beautiful, intelligent woman who seemed to offer exactly what he needed, then maybe some good could come from my disaster. 2 years after my deportation, I'm still working at the warehouse and still living in Linda's basement. I've been promoted to shift supervisor, which comes with a small raise and slightly better hours. I've started taking community college classes in the evenings, working toward a degree in criminal justice. I don't know if I'll ever be able to use that degree professionally, given my criminal record, but learning about law enforcement and criminal psychology helps me understand what happened to me and how these operations work. I've also started a support group for victims of international romance and business scams. We meet once a month at a community center in Denver, and we share our stories, offer advice to people who are currently being targeted, and try to process the emotional trauma of being so thoroughly manipulated and betrayed. The group has taught me that the psychological damage from these scams often outlasts the financial damage. Most of us struggle with trust issues, depression, and feelings of worthlessness. We blame ourselves for being gullible, even though we were victims of sophisticated criminal operations. We feel ashamed of being fooled, even though the people who fooled us were professional criminals with years of experience in psychological manipulation. "The hardest part isn't the money I lost," one group member told us. "The hardest part is knowing that someone studied me so carefully, learned exactly what I needed to hear, and used that knowledge to destroy my life. It makes me question everything I believe about human nature and my own judgment." I understand that feeling completely. Koulap didn't just steal my money or ruin my business. She violated my ability to trust my own judgment about people. Even now, years later, I analyze every interaction I have with new people, looking for signs that they might be trying to manipulate me. It's exhausting and isolating, but it's also probably necessary. I can't afford to be fooled again. The group has also helped me understand that recovery from this kind of trauma is a long process that involves rebuilding not just your financial life, but your entire sense of self. You have to learn to forgive yourself for being human enough to trust someone who seemed trustworthy. You have to accept that being a victim doesn't make you weak or stupid. And you have to find ways to move forward without becoming so cynical that you can't form any genuine relationships. I'm still working on all of that. Some days are better than others. Some days I feel like I'm making progress toward a new kind of normal life. Other days I feel overwhelmed by regret and anger about what I lost and how completely I was fooled. But I've learned something important about resilience and human nature. Even after being destroyed by someone who exploited your trust, it's possible to rebuild. Not the same life you had before, but a different life that has meaning and purpose. It's possible to take your experience of being victimized and use it to help other people avoid the same fate. I'll never get back what I lost in Thailand. I'll never get back the money, the business, the dreams, or the 5 years of my life that were stolen from me. But I can use what I learned to try to protect other people from going through the same thing. If that gives my experience some kind of meaning, then maybe it was worth surviving. I still think about Koulap sometimes. I wonder if she's still running the same scam on other desperate foreign businessmen. I wonder if she ever thinks about the lives she's destroyed, or if we're just business transactions to her. I wonder if she's actually from the Philippines, or if that was just another lie designed to make her seem more trustworthy. But mostly, I try not to think about her at all. She's moved on to other victims and other crimes. I need to move on to whatever kind of life I can build from what's left of mine. That's not the ending I wanted for my story, but it's the ending I have to work with. Sometimes people ask me if I regret going to Thailand in the first place. That's a hard question to answer. If I hadn't gone to Thailand, I wouldn't have lost everything I worked for. But I also wouldn't have learned what I learned about human nature, criminal psychology, and my own capacity for survival. I wouldn't have been able to help the people I've helped through my writing and support group work. I can't say the trade-off was worth it. The cost was too high, and the lessons came too late to save my own life. But I can say that even the worst experiences can teach you something valuable if you're willing to learn from them instead of just being destroyed by them. If you're reading this story, maybe you're someone who's considering a business opportunity in Southeast Asia, or maybe you've met someone who seems too good to be true. If so, please learn from my mistakes. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you want it to be right. Remember that people who offer exactly what you need are often the most dangerous people you can meet, and understand that being desperate for success or love makes you vulnerable to people who are professionally skilled at exploiting desperation. Most importantly, remember that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. No matter how intelligent, attractive, or trustworthy the person offering it appears to be. No matter how much you want to believe that you finally found someone who sees your potential and wants to help you succeed. Sometimes the people who seem most helpful are the ones planning to destroy you. I learned that lesson the hardest way possible, and I hope you never have to learn it at all.